Welcome to today's story, The Sigil of Malevolent Fates, generated by StoryWave.ai, March 2024. Please tap that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Chapter 1, The Fateful Gathering. Beneath the penumbra of Riverside's waning crescent moon, the silhouette of the long-abandoned Llewellyn mansion loomed like a forgotten monolith. Vines clung to its crumbling facade, and the windows, opaque with the dust of decades, reflected the world with the sorrow of sightless eyes. It was here, in the shadow of legends whispered on the playground and insinuated in the hush of moonlit campfires, that Adam Bryant, known to his few confidants as Addy, found himself drawn. His lean build moved with the hesitance of one teetering on the edge of a precipice, the mysterious amulet around his neck glinting with an inscrutable history. Evelyn Pierce, or Eve as she preferred, marched at his side, her petite form adorned with Gothic jewelry that clinked softly with each assertive step. Her burgundy hair, a sharp division to the night, seemed to capture the very essence of dusk. Luke Harrington, or Lucky, followed, his athletic frame clad in a Letterman jacket that seemed out of place amidst the decay. A lighter flicked in his hand, illuminator of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Finally, Hannah Kim, known amongst the group as the Oracle, shuffled her deck of tarot cards with an absent-minded grace. Her voice, when she spoke, weaved through the air like a calming balm, yet her eyes hinted at secrets untold. As the quartet navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Forsaken Manse, the air itself felt heavy with whispers of the past. The raven black of Adam's hair blended with the dark, and his green gaze pierced the gloom, searching for the heart of the legend, the occult chest that was the source of countless riverside myths. "You think it's real, Addie?" Luke's brash tone cut through the silence. His blue eyes sparkled with a skepticism that was his armor against the world. Eve's amber eyes met Adam's, her lips curling into a bold smirk. "What, afraid, Lucky? I thought you didn't believe in this hocus-pocus." "It's not about belief," Adam interjected softly, his voice a nervous tremble in the dark. "It's about understanding what we're meddling with." The Oracle remained silent, her fingers pausing their dance through the tarot cards as they came upon a door, its surface etched with the wear of time. With a collective breath, they pushed it open, revealing a secret chamber that beckoned like a mouth of shadows. There, shrouded in the embrace of the ancient room, the chest waited. Its wood was dark and insidious, carved with sigils that seemed to writhe under Adam's gaze. It was as though the very air around the chest was thicker, charged with an energy that defied the laws of nature. Adam's heart raced, a struggle between his innate curiosity and the alarm bells that rang clear in his mind. "We shouldn't," he began, but Eve cut him off. "Don't lose your nerve now. We're this close," she said, her tone a mix of excitement and challenge. The Oracle finally spoke, her words a whisper. "Fate brought us here." She knelt beside the chest, her fingers brushing against an old leather-bound journal that lay beside it. And fate, it seems, has a story to tell. As Hannah opened the journal, the pages crackled with the protest of age. The writing within was an elegant script, penned by a hand from a bygone era. It spoke of the chest's creation, of rituals and celestial alignments, of a power sealed within that was never meant to be disturbed. "The path we walk tonight," Adam murmured, "it feels like it's been laid out for us since the beginning of time." Eve's confident voice broke the somber reflection. "Then let's not keep destiny waiting." Their laughter, tinged with unease, filled the chamber as they gathered around the chest, oblivious to the malevolent fates their actions might unleash. In their youthful daring, they stood on the brink of ruin, the lines of their destinies intertwining like the sigils on the chest, a pattern complex and inexorable. As the night deepened, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, and the chest, like a heart long stilled, awaited the touch that would set its pulse to beating once more. Chapter 2, The Unholy Communion. A hush fell over the chamber as the quartet encircled the chest, the ants kits clutched in their hands like relics of a bygone era. The Llewellyn mansion, once a bastion of opulence, now stood as a silent witness to the folly that unfolded within its decayed walls. Adam's fingers traced the intricate carvings of the chest, the amulet at his neck, pulsating with a rhythm that mirrored his quickening pulse. His mind told him to tread carefully, Yet the allure of the unknown beckoned him forward with an irresistible siren's call. Eve, her eyes alight with the thrill of the forbidden, spread the contents of the kit before her. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," she said, her tone a mix of daring and irreverence. Luke watched with a smirk, his skepticism a shield against the creeping dread that sought to invade his thoughts. "This is child's play," he scoffed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The oracle, her hands steady as she laid out the tarot cards, glanced up to meet Adam's gaze. "There's a fine line between play and peril," she intoned, her voice a foretoken of the unknown. With the flicker of candles casting shadows that danced like specters upon the walls, they began. Each member of the group took their role in the ritual with a levity that belied the gravity of their actions. Incantations, once sealed within the chest, now found voice in the chamber, uttered with a carelessness that bordered on the profane. Yet as the ritual progressed, a change came over them. Eve's laughter faltered, her amber eyes reflecting a newfound sobriety. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, a tremor in her voice. Adam nodded, the amulet's glow intensifying. "It's as if we've tapped into something ancient." Luke's bravado waned, his athletic form tensing as a cold wind swept through the room, unbidden and unnatural. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice betraying a hint of fear. The oracle remained silent, her dark brown eyes fixed on the cards that now seemed to move of their own accord. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that pressed down upon them with the weight of eons. Then, with a suddenness that left them breathless, the ritual concluded. A shadow, formless and vast, stretched across the chamber, its presence a void that hungered for substance. "What have we done?" Adam's voice was barely a whisper, his usual reserve giving way to a dawning realization of their folly. The rifts within the group, once small cracks, now yawned like chasms. Accusations and recriminations flew as old wounds and unresolved tensions surfaced. Eve's boldness clashed with Luke's denial, while the oracle's introspection deepened into a silence that was its own indictment. "You took it too far," Luke said, his eyes accusing as he faced Adam. Eve's response was sharp, her sarcasm now a weapon. "We all played our part, Lucky. Don't pretend you're any less responsible." In the center of the storm stood Adam, the amulet's glow now a warning in the darkness they had awoken. The shadowy presence, an echo of their collective hubris, seemed to coil around them, a serpent biding its time. As the candles flickered and died, leaving them in the embrace of an repressive darkness, the group faced the consequences of their actions. The path to ruin lay open before them, each step forward a descent into an abyss of their own making. The Llewellyn mansion, once a silent spectator, now seemed to breathe with the life of the shadow they had unleashed, a life that was an antithesis to their own. Chapter 3, Echoes of the Damned. As nightfall draped itself over Riverside, the air was thick with an unspoken dread that clung to the town like a shroud. The once vibrant streets now lay deserted. The townsfolk shuddered away as whispers of the Llewellyn mansion's latest visitors stirred the silence. In the wake of their ill-fated seance, Adam found himself wandering the moonlit path home, the weight of responsibility an albatross around his neck. The amulet against his chest was a constant reminder of the night's folly, its glow a ghostly harbinger of regret. Eve, her usual fiery demeanor dampened by the night's eerie turn, walked beside Adam, her steps a dance with the shadows that seemed to reach for her with every flicker of the street lamps. Luke, his skepticism a distant memory, trudged along, each step heavy with the realization that their meddling may have unlocked something beyond their control. His usual bravado was absent, replaced by a silence that was as telling as any of his boisterous claims. The oracle, Hannah, trailed behind, her eyes lost to the night sky, as if seeking answers from the stars themselves. The tarot cards in her pocket felt like stones, their weight an instrument to the gravity of the situation they had all helped to create. It was then that the town's stillness was broken by a sound that chilled them to their core, a deep, resonant beep that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound that did not belong to the world of the living, a somber note that resonated with the very fabric of Riverside. What was that? Eve's voice broke the silence, her question hanging in the air like a specter. Adam swallowed hard, his lean form rigid with a fear that rendered him mute. He wanted to speak, to offer some solace or explanation, but found himself trapped in the web of his trepidation. Luke stopped in his tracks, his athletic form tense. That wasn't natural. It's like it came from the ground itself. Hannah's voice was a whisper, a ripple in the stillness. It's a response, a call from the depths we stirred. As they continued their journey, the beep echoed in their ears, a ghostly refrain that followed them with relentless persistence. The sound was a reminder of the door they had opened, a door that refused to be closed. It was not long before the first of the eerie occurrences began. Objects moved of their own volition, shadows took on menacing forms, and the air grew cold with the proximity of an unseen presence. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next chapter of a tale that was being written in darkness. Then, in a twist that none could have anticipated, Eve vanished. One moment she was there, her burgundy hair a defiant flame in the night. The next, she was gone, as if swallowed by the very shadows that danced around them. Adam's heart raced, his fear now a living thing that threatened to consume him. "Eve," he called into the night, his voice a desperate plea. Luke and Hannah joined in the search, their calls a chorus of urgency that filled the streets. But there was no answer, no sign of their bold friend, only the constraining beep that seemed to mock their efforts. As they scoured the town, the history of the Llewellyn mansion whispered its secrets through the pages of forgotten journals and the memories of the oldest residents. Tales of occult rituals, of a family consumed by the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, of a mansion that was more a tomb than a home. The connection between past and present became clear, the lines of history and their own story blurring into one. The mansion had been the stage for many such tales, and now they were the latest players in its tragic theater. The night wore on, and with Eve's disappearance, the reality of their situation set in. The path to ruin was no longer a mere concept, but a road they had set foot upon with blind abandon. And as the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, the question that echoed in their hearts was not if they could undo their mistake, but at what cost. Chapter 4. The Fraying of Bonds. In the wan light of dawn, the riverside landscape lay draped in an eerie stillness, the kind that seems to herald the calm before a storm. Crisp autumn air swirled through the desolate streets, carrying with it a hint of decay from the edges of the whispering forest that bordered the town. Luke's confident stride had long since faltered, giving way to a frantic pace as he hurried back to the safety of his home. A once staunch skeptic, he now felt the icy fingers of dread clutching at his spine. His encounter with the apparition, a specter that bore no resemblance to the world he knew, had shaken the very foundations of his disbelief. Adam, his mind a tempest of guilt and fear, trudged beside Luke, his raven hair a marked difference to the pallor that had taken residence in his features. The amulet at his neck throbbed with an energy that seemed to feed on the growing discord. Hannah, her calm demeanor now a fractured facade, walked with them, her thoughts a tangled weave of premonitions and regret. The tarot cards in her pocket, once a source of comfort, now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. "Did you see it? Tell me you saw it." Luke's voice was a ragged edge, slicing through the morning calm. Adam's response was measured, his soft-spoken words doing little to mask the tremor that laced them. "I saw it, Luke. We cannot deny what's happening any longer." Hannah's voice, usually soothing, carried an edge of frustration. "The Essence kits, the ritual, it's all connected. We've opened a door we can't close." Accusations began to fly between them, the once solid bonds of friendship straining under the gravity of their circumstances. Trust, that fragile filament, was fraying, unraveling with each passing moment. "It was your idea to use the damn kits." Luke rounded on Adam, his blue eyes aflame with anger and fear. Adam recoiled, the weight of his responsibility a suffocating cloak around his shoulders. "I didn't know, Luke. I couldn't have known this would happen." The Oracle interjected, her voice a desperate attempt to weave peace from the frayed threads of their fellowship. "Blame will not save us now. We have to understand what we're dealing with." As if summoned by their strife, the occult manifestations began anew. Objects levitated, flung by unseen forces. Whispers filled the air, their source invisible. And the shadows seemed to watch, their dark forms twisting in the corners of their eyes. In a desperate search for answers, they turned to the diary of an old cult member, its worn pages a chronicle of the Llewellyn mansion's dark history. The diary spoke of the Essence kits as tools of communion, a means to bridge the mortal world with realms beyond. But it warned of a price that would be exacted in full should the kits be misused. Luke's hands trembled as he turned the pages, his earlier denial now a distant memory. What have we done? We've invited something into our world, something that doesn't belong, Hannah murmured, her dark brown eyes scanning the cryptic text. Adam stood silent, the amulet's pulsing glow a lantern of their collective doom. The path they had chosen was one of ruin, and with each step, the darkness they had awoken clung tighter, a shroud that threatened to smother their very souls. With Eve's disappearance, a gaping wound in their midst, the question loomed large. Who would be next to succumb to the malevolent fates they had unleashed? Chapter 5, The Sinister Harvest. Beneath the sickle of a new moon, Riverside streets lay barren, the silence amplified by the absence of life. The town, once teeming with small-town bustle, now seemed a ghost of its former self, a tableau of neglect and unease. Adam found himself standing at the edge of the town square, the familiar facades of shops and homes now alien in their stillness. His heart was a clenched fist in his chest, the guilt he bore a mantle that threatened to crush him. He had led his friends, his closest companions, into a maelstrom from which there was no escape. Luke, still reeling from the previous night's terrors, stood beside Adam, his face etched with lines of fatigue and concern. The athletic confidence he once wore like armor had been stripped away, leaving a vulnerability he could no longer hide. The town, it's like everyone just vanished, Luke said, his voice unsteady as his gaze swept the empty streets. Adam's response was hollow, a mere echo of his usual careful articulation. We need to find help, to warn them about what we've unleashed. Their conversation was cut short by a scream that rent the air, a sound that curdled the blood and rooted them to the spot. It was Hannah's voice, and as they turned towards the source, they saw her figure, backlit by the pale moon, being pulled into the gnarled embrace of the Llewellyn woods. Luke bolted forward, but Adam caught his arm, his green eyes wide with the realization of their powerlessness. We can't just rush in there. It's what it wants, to pick us off one by one. You suggesting we just abandon Hannah? Luke's voice cracked with a mix of anger and fear. No, but we must be smart about this, Adam insisted, the weight of his guilt lending strength to his resolve. They ventured to the edge of the woods, the trees standing like sentinels to a realm of shadows. The darkness within seemed to pulse with a malevolent life, a stark contrast to the stark emptiness of the town behind them. Hannah, they called, their voices swallowed by the dense canopy. There was no reply, only the wind's mournful song through the leaves, a dirge for the lost and the damned. Adam's search for allies led him to the town's historical archives, a repository of Riverside's legacy and the secrets it held. There, amidst the musty tomes and faded maps, he discovered the truth about the cult that had once called the mansion home. The S-Ants Kit, an unassuming collection of esoteric artifacts, was designed as a key, a means to open a gateway for an entity that the cult worshipped. The entity, a being of darkness and despair, sought entry into their world, and the ritual they had performed was the final harvest it needed to break through. Adam's hands trembled as he absorbed the revelation, the implications a heavy chain around his spirit. The cult's legacy was a tapestry woven with threads of madness and ambition, and they had unwittingly added their own strands to its design. Luke's patience was wearing thin, his need to act, to do something, anything, a crescendo that could not be ignored. We can't just sit here and read about this. We have to find Hannah to stop this thing. Adam closed the ancient ledger with a resounding thud, its echo a somber note in the stillness of the archive. We will find her, Luke, and we will end this. But we must understand our enemy if we are to defeat it. The two friends, bound by a fate of their own making, set out with a grim determination. The darkness they had awakened was now a part of Riverside, a sinister harvest that grew with each passing hour. And as the moon climbed higher, casting its indifferent light upon the town, the question remained, would they stem the tide of shadows, or would they too be consumed by the sigil of malevolent fates? Chapter 6, A Glimmer of Hope. The Riverside Library stood as a navigation light of knowledge, its neoclassical architecture a silent testament to the town's reverence for history. Within its walls, Adam scoured the labyrinthine stacks, the dim light from the antique lamps casting long, quivering shadows between the aisles. Amidst the dusty volumes and leather-bound tomes, he discovered an ancient grimoire, its pages yellowed with time, the text a cryptic dance of arcane symbols and rites. Adam's fingers traced the lines, a whisper of leather and paper, as he absorbed the knowledge that promised a sliver of salvation. Luke watched Adam, his blue eyes reflecting a mix of hope and skepticism. "You really think that thing has the answers?" Adam looked up, his green eyes meeting Luke's. "It speaks of a counter-ritual, one that could potentially reverse what we've done. But the cost." His voice trailed off, the weight of the decision anchoring his words to the silence of the room. The counter-ritual required a sacrifice, a willing exchange of energy to balance the scales they had so carelessly tipped. It was a gamble, a roll of cosmic dice that offered redemption at an unfathomable price. Luke leaned in, his voice low, a reflection of the urgency that gnawed at his core. "Whatever it takes, right? We can't leave Hannah and Eve too. Whatever's got them." Adam sighed, the grimoire's revelations a heavy burden. "It's not that simple. The sacrifice, it could be one's life force, their very soul." The revelation hung between them, a specter of doom that threatened to suffocate the hope they had just unearthed. The library, once a sanctuary of wisdom, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing with the whispers of those who had sought forbidden knowledge before them. Luke ran a hand through his dirty blonde hair, his usual confidence replaced by a creeping dread. "And if it's one of us, what then?" Adam closed the grimoire, the sound resonating in the quiet. "Then we make a choice. One of us for all of us." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden chill, a breeze that slipped through the cracks of the old building, carrying with it the scent of decay. It was a reminder of the cult's sinister designs, a plot to harvest the souls of the innocent and use them as vessels for their dark deity. The town's history, once a quaint tapestry of community milestones, now revealed its macabre threads, each one woven with the intent to draw forth an entity that hungered for the light of human spirits. Adam and Luke stood in the heart of the library, the grimoire a map to their potential salvation or their ultimate downfall. The choice that lay before Adam was a razor's edge, a balance between self-preservation and the altruism that had always guided him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its last golden rays upon the town, the library's shadows grew long and menacing. Adam knew that the descent into darkness was not just a path but a precipice, and as the light faded, so too did the certainty of their fate. The ritual that had seemed a game was now a snare, and the only way out was through a door marked with sacrifice. With the night came a resolve, a steeling of wills against the encroaching dark. Adam and Luke, bound by the chains of their actions, prepared to face the ruin they had wrought, knowing that the glimmer of hope they clung to was as fragile as the flame of a candle in a tempest. Chapter 7. The Darkness Within. Adam stood in the crumbling atrium of Llewellyn Mansion, the grandeur of its past life mocking them with tattered curtains that danced like specters in the drafty air. The once intricate mosaic tiles underfoot were now cracked and marred by the passage of time, the patterns disrupted as if to mirror the chaos the friends had wrought. Luke paced beside him, his form a shadow against the fading grandeur. The mansion, now a prison of their own making, loomed around them, the weight of its history a tangible force pressing down upon their shoulders. "We've done everything right according to the grimoire," Adam said, the words tasting of ash in his mouth. The candles arrayed in a circle flickered, casting an eerie glow that gave the illusion of life to the statues that stood sentinel along the walls. "Then why isn't it working?" Luke's voice was tinged with desperation, his usual stoicism crumbling like the plaster from the mansion's once majestic walls. "There must be something we're missing, some element that's not accounted for," Adam muttered, his eyes scanning the pages of the grimoire once more. The moment of tense speculation was shattered by a cacophony that rose from the bowels of the mansion, a sound that clawed at the edges of sanity. Luke's scream pierced the chaos as a force unseen wrenched him into the darkness beyond the candlelight. Adam lunged towards his friend's last known location, but the darkness enveloped Luke, swallowing him whole as if he had never existed. The candles snuffed out one by one, leaving Adam alone in the grim dark. From the shadows, a voice emerged, a melodic timbre that belied the malevolence it carried. Adam, it cooed, a serpent's whisper. All is not lost. You seek to mend the rift, but the power to do so lies within you. Adam's pulse thundered in his ears, his will shaken as the entity played upon his deepest fears. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice a mix of defiance and dread. "I am the culmination of your desires, the darkness within given form," the voice replied, its presence suffusing the air with a chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. The mansion, a carcass of its former self, sighed with the weight of the entity's words. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, the whispers of the past mingling with the temptations that now ensnared Adam's mind. "Power is the balm for your guilt, the answer to your silent pleas," the entity continued, the promise like a bittersweet poison on the tongue. Adam clenched his fists, the amulet at his neck pulsing with a light that fought against the encroaching gloom. "I don't believe you. My friends, your friends, sought the thrill of the unknown, and in their hubris, they found their fates. You, however, are different. You have the capacity to wield the darkness, to control it." The mansion seemed to breathe around him, the walls creaking with the weight of centuries, the shadows stretching like fingers to caress his thoughts. Adam's mind raced, the allure of the entity's offer warring with the knowledge of its deceit. "You lie," Adam spat, though the seed of temptation had already been planted. "I will not succumb to you." Laughter echoed through the corridors, a sound that bore no mirth, only cold certainty. "You will seek me out in time, Adam. When you realize the futility of resistance, you will embrace the darkness within." With those final words, the presence receded, leaving Adam alone with the echo of his own racing heartbeat. The descent into darkness was not merely a path, but a descent into his own soul, where the true battle raged between the light of his intentions and the shadows of temptation. Chapter 8: The Gathering Storm. Clouds, black as wrought iron, clawed across the sky above Riverside, blotting out the sun with an ominous embrace. Lightning, like the lashing of celestial whips, illuminated the heavens, while thunder grumbled a dirge for the damned. The town, already reeling from the inexplicable events, found itself in the throes of a tempest that defied the natural order. Adam stood at the threshold of the mansion, the edifice now more mausoleum than home, its walls groaning under the strain of the storm. His silhouette was etched against the chaos, the amulet at his throat a lone radar in the tumult. "You should leave, get to safety while you can," urged a voice from behind him. Mrs. Aldridge, the town librarian, her features etched with concern, approached Adam, her hands knotted tightly around the strap of her satchel. Adam turned, his green eyes reflecting the storm's fury. "And abandon Riverside to this madness?" Mrs. Aldridge shook her head, her gray hair whipping about her face in the wind. "You think you can stop it? This is bigger than us, Adam, bigger than anything we've ever known." The wind howled, a banshee's wail, as Adam wrestled with the choice before him. To flee was to surrender, to admit defeat in the face of an overwhelming adversary. Yet to stay was to walk willingly into the maw of darkness, with no promise of return. Visions of Hannah, Luke, and Eve flickered before his eyes, their faces a haunting reminder of the cost of his indecision. They beckoned him, not with words, but with the silence of absence, guiding him toward the heart of the storm. "I have to face it," Adam said, his perseverance hardening like the stones that formed the mansion's foundation. "I brought this upon us, and I will see it through to the end." Mrs. Aldridge reached out, her hand grasping his arm. "Then you won't be alone. We will stand with you, Adam." The town, once a tapestry of community and tradition, now lay at the mercy of forces beyond comprehension. As Adam and Mrs. Aldridge ventured into the swelling darkness, the storm's crescendo mirrored the chaos that churned within Adam's soul. The mansion, a nexus of power for the entity that held Riverside in its grasp, beckoned them forward. Each step was a defiance, a declaration that they would not cede their town to the shadows that sought to claim it. Adam could feel the entity's presence, a pressure against his mind, a whisper of promises and threats. It was the darkness within made manifest, a reflection of the human capacity for both creation and destruction. Whatever happens, Adam said, his voice barely audible over the storm, we must not let fear dictate our actions. Mrs. Aldridge nodded, her eyes steely with the light of purpose. Fear has no dominion here. We stand as beacons against the night. Together, they crossed the threshold into the heart of the mansion, the storm raging around them a tempest of otherworldly origin. The descent into darkness was no longer a mere path, but a spiral, and at its center lay the truth of the sigil of malevolent fates. Whether it would be their salvation or their doom, only time would tell. Chapter 9: Shadows of the Past. The mansion, once a symbol of Riverside's wealth, now bore the scars of its sinister legacy. Portraits of the Llewellyn family hung askew on the walls, their eyes following Adam with an inescapable gaze that seemed to accuse him of his forebearers' sins. You were chosen, Adam. Mrs. Aldridge's voice carried through the grand hall, the sound muffled by the thick air as she approached with cautious steps. Your bloodline was marked by the cult for this very moment. Adam turned towards her, the revelation of his destined role in the cult's machinations, a bitter pill to swallow. Chosen? He echoed, the word tasting of poison on his tongue. How could they have known? Mrs. Aldridge adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the ancient texts that lay scattered on the mahogany table before them. It was written, in the stars, in the prophecies they followed. Your family was to be the key that would unlock the gateway. The betrayal stung, a wound deeper than flesh, as Adam considered the generations that had preceded him. His own parents, who had never spoken of the mansion's history, had they known? Were they too part of this unfathomable plot? I can't believe they would be part of something so evil. Adam's voice broke, the weight of his heritage a yoke upon his shoulders. Mrs. Aldridge placed a consoling hand on his shoulder. Sometimes we are caught in the webs of history, Adam. Our choices are not always our own. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within Adam as he paced the length of the room, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Each step was a march through the accounts of time, each revelation a piece of the puzzle that was his cursed destiny. I have to end this, Adam declared, his firmness hardening like the stone gargoyles that loomed over the mansion's entrance. No matter what the cost. Mrs. Aldridge nodded, her own determination aflame in the growing darkness. Then we must uncover the full extent of the ritual. Only with complete understanding can we hope to reverse it. Together they delved deeper into the labyrinth of the mansion, the air growing colder as they approached the library, a repository of forbidden knowledge. The books, bound in leather and secrets, whispered of times when the veil between worlds was thinner, and the power that bled through was not to be trifled with. Adam's hand hovered over an ancient tome, its cover embossed with the sigil that had become all too familiar. This is it, he said, the weight of his ancestors' decisions heavy upon him. The truth lies within these pages. As he opened the book, the storm outside crescendoed, a symphony of nature's fury and supernatural power. The shadows of the past stretched long and dark, intertwining with the present to form a tapestry of impending doom. Adam and Mrs. Aldridge stood firm, their eyes locked on the text that held the key to Riverside's salvation or its ultimate destruction. The path to ruin, once a mere whisper in the accounts of his family's history, was now a road upon which Adam walked, his every step a defiance of the darkness that sought to claim him and his town. Chapter 10: The Wages of Sin. In the heart of the Llewellyn mansion, where the air was thick with the musky scent of decay and the weight of unspoken secrets, Adam stood at the precipice of an abyss he had never dared to contemplate. The grand hall, with its vaulted ceilings and tarnished candelabra, bore witness to his transformation, the shadows cast by the flickering candles playing across his features like a silent lament. Mrs. Aldridge, her eyes reflecting the storm that raged outside, peered at Adam from across the room, her voice a steady navigation light in the tempest of his turmoil. Adam, this isn't the way. There's always another choice. Adam's laugh was hollow, echoing off the marble floors and the cracked stained glass windows. Choice? What choice do we have when every path leads to ruin? The librarian's hands, though trembling, were resolute as she clutched the ancient grimoire to her chest. There is always a choice, Adam. You must believe that. Adam's gaze, once vibrant with the light of curiosity, now held a darkness that seemed to drink in the scant light. Belief is a luxury we can't afford. Power is the only currency that holds any value now. The grimoire lay open on the podium, its pages fluttering as if in protest. The ancient text revealing the final phase of the ritual that Adam now found himself ensnared within. The mansion, a witness to man's hubris and the folly of seeking dominion over the arcane, was the stage upon which the final act would play out. You think harnessing this power will end the suffering, that it will restore what we've lost, Mrs. Aldridge said, her voice tinged with sorrow. But at what cost? Adam's hand hovered over the sigil that dominated the page, the lines seeming to writhe under his touch. The cost is irrelevant. The suffering ends tonight. As he spoke the incantation, a language that was as old as the earth itself, the air in the grand hall grew colder, the shadows deepening into an impenetrable gloom. The candles snuffed out, one by one, as if extinguished by an unseen breath. Mrs. Aldridge stepped forward, her stance defiant. This isn't you, Adam. You're better than this. But Adam was beyond reach, the entity's power coursing through him, a torrent that promised to sweep away all pain, all fear, all doubt. He was the vessel, the conduit through which the darkness would be unleashed. The mansion trembled, a groan of stone and timber, as the ritual reached its zenith. Adam's voice rose above the storm, a crescendo of power and despair as he completed the incantation, the final words a benediction to the darkness. In that moment, there was a silence so profound it felt as though the world held its breath. Then, with a sound like the breaking of the earth, the ritual was complete. Adam, the last scion of the Llewellyn line, had embraced the entity's power, crossing a threshold from which there could be no return. The Grand Hall, once a monument to Riverside's elite, was now the epicenter of a cataclysm that would ripple through the fabric of reality. Adam, his morality a distant memory, stood at the heart of it all, the architect of his own damnation and the harbinger of the town's fate. And as the storm outside reached its furious peak, the Llewellyn mansion and all it contained was consumed by the power it had sought to command. The wages of sin, as ancient as time itself, were exacted in full, and the path to ruin reached its inexorable conclusion. Chapter 11, A Soul Alone. The mansion, a labyrinth of secrets and sorrow, echoed with the remnants of laughter and camaraderie that now seemed a cruel mockery of the present. Adam called out, his voice a desperate plea that fell flat against the cold, unfeeling walls. Eve, Luke, Hannah? Each name was a shard of glass, cutting into the remnants of his hope. The response was nothing but the hollow sound of his own voice, distorted and thrown back at him by the mansion's twisted corridors. He stumbled upon the library, where the scent of ancient leather and musty paper filled the air, a stark reminder of the knowledge that had led them all astray. The grimoire lay open, its pages a colloquy to the forbidden desires that had condemned them. Adam ran a hand along the spines of the books, each one a sentinel standing guard over the history of the cult that had doomed his lineage. His fingers paused over a volume bound in dark, cracked leather, the title etched in faded gold lettering, The Chronicles of the Llewellyn Legacy. With a sense of morbid curiosity, he thumbed through the pages, the inked words a chronicle of the covenant his ancestors had struck with the entity, a pact sealed with blood and shadow. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured, addressing the absent author. "You knew, and still you played with forces beyond your ken." The library seemed to respond, the air shifting as if in acknowledgement of Adam's realization. The candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters over the bookshelves. The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see Mrs. Aldridge, her presence a small comfort in the vast emptiness of the mansion. "Adam," she began, her words careful, "you must not let despair consume you. There are still truths to uncover, still ways to make amends." Adam's laugh was a bitter sound, devoid of any real humor. "Amends? The path I've walked has led to nothing but ruin. My friends, they're gone because of me." Mrs. Aldridge approached, her eyes meeting his, a glint of endurance within. "Then honor them. Fight against the darkness that seeks to use you." He pondered her words, the notion of resistance a faint spark in the smothering gloom. "What's left to fight for? I'm alone, and this," he gestured to the grimoire. "This is the legacy I'm left with." "You're not alone," Mrs. Aldridge insisted. "I'm here, and there are others in Riverside who remember the good you've done. We can face this together." Adam looked at her, the sincerity in her voice a balm to the raw edges of his solitude. Together, he echoed, the concept foreign yet oddly comforting. The mansion, with its creaking floorboards and whispering walls, stood as a monument to the price of hubris. But within its confines, a new alliance formed, a union of the remaining light against the encroaching darkness. As the storm outside continued to rage, Adam and Mrs. Aldridge set forth to unravel the final secrets of the Llewellyn legacy. The point of no return, a line already crossed, but with a glimmer of hope that redemption might still be found amidst the ruins. Chapter 12. The Inevitable Descent. Riverside, once a tapestry of small-town charm and communal warmth, had become a tableau of despair. Darkness, thick and palpable, clung to the quaint streets like a parasitic shroud, leaching the color from the world. The townsfolk, their faces etched with fear, moved as if through a nightmare that had spilled into their waking hours. At the heart of this maelstrom stood Adam, his once clear green eyes now mirroring the abyss that had claimed his soul. With each passing moment, the entity's power surged through him, eroding the vestiges of the man he once was. Mrs. Aldridge, her face a canvas of stoicism despite the chaos, approached Adam in the once bustling town square, now a ghostly echo of its former self. "Adam, look around you," she implored, her voice steady amid the hubbub of despair. "This isn't what you wanted." Adam, his gaze sweeping across the desolate landscape, replied with a voice that was not fully his own. "It's too late for regrets. The entity uses me as its vessel, and through me, it will consume all." The librarian, her satchel clutched tightly against her, frowned deeply. "There must be a remnant of you that resists, that fights against this end." A bitter chuckle escaped Adam's lips as he turned to face her, his silhouette a dark stain against the encroaching shadows. "Resistance is a luxury afforded to those who have hope. I am beyond such delusions." In the distance, the sound of chaos rose, a symphony of screams and the rending of reality as the entity claimed Riverside citizens one by one. Each soul absorbed into the darkness was a note in a dirge that heralded the town's demise. Adam's expression, once so full of life and curiosity, was now a mask of indifference. "They are lost, Mrs. Aldridge, just like the rest of us." "No," she countered, her voice a lance of conviction piercing the gloom. "As long as we draw breath, there is hope. We can still undo this." He studied her, the entity within him analyzing her words as a predator gauges its prey. "And what would you have me do? The power I wield is beyond control, beyond reckoning." Mrs. Aldridge stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You must fight it, Adam. Fight for the humanity that I know still flickers within you." Around them, the town continued to unravel, the fabric of reality tearing at the seams. The entity's laughter, a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, resonated through the very stones of Riverside, a mocking testament to the spiral of doom that had been set in motion. Adam turned away, his figure a monument to the town's darkest hour. To fight is to delay the inevitable. The descent has begun, and there is no turning back. As the darkness deepened, swallowing the last vestiges of day, Riverside stood on the brink of oblivion, its fate intertwined with the man who had become the harbinger of its end. The path to ruin, once a mere whisper of possibility, was now a deafening roar that consumed all in its wake. Chapter 13. The Echo of Conscience. In the once hallowed halls of the Llewellyn mansion, where the specter of desolation clung to the ornate woodwork and the air was thick with the scent of bygone opulence, Adam stood, a figure marred by the conflict raging within him. The grand staircase, with its banister twisted like the gnarled branches of an ancient tree, bore silent witness to the battle between the remnants of his humanity and the will of the entity that sought to consume him. The whispers began as a gentle murmur, a breeze of voices that caressed the edges of his consciousness. They were familiar, yet distant, echoes of a life that now felt like a dream, half remembered. "Adam," the voice of Evelyn, her tone imbued with the warmth he once knew. "Remember who you are, who you were meant to be." Adam's response was a choked sound, strangled by the darkness that enveloped his heart. "Evelyn," he queried the empty air, his voice a mix of hope and despair. "You must fight it, Adam," another voice implored, unmistakably Luke's, the athletic confidence that once defined him now a whisper of encouragement. "Don't let this thing win." The mansion's chandeliers, their crystals dulled by the passage of time, swayed as if in response to the unseen battle. Adam clutched at his head, his raven hair a disheveled veil over his furrowed brow. "I'm trying," he gasped, the words a lifeline thrown into the tempest of his mind. "It's so strong." From the depths of the mansion, a soft shuffle of tarot cards whispered through the corridors, and Hannah's voice, soothing as ever, joined the chorus. "The path you walk is dark, but not yet written. You can change the ending, Adam." Mrs. Aldridge, her figure a bastion of robustness amid the encroaching gloom, approached with cautious steps. "Adam, you are not alone in this. We stand with you." He lifted his gaze to meet hers, the turmoil in his eyes a storm of green and obsidian. "How can I fight something that is a part of me?" The librarian reached out, her hand steady despite the maelstrom that surrounded them. "By remembering the good within you, the light that the darkness can never truly extinguish." Adam's hands balled into fists at his sides, the amulet around his neck pulsing with a sinister light. He took a shuddering breath, each inhale a battle, each exhale a fragile victory. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, the mansion seeming to lean in, eager to hear the confession of its master. "You can," Mrs. Aldridge insisted, her words a torch in the shadow that had fallen over Riverside. "Your friends believe in you, and so do I." Around them the mansion creaked and groaned, a symphony of ancient wood and stone that resonated with the tension of the moment. The entity, a malevolence as old as time, pushed against Adam's resolve, a tide of blackness that sought to drown him in despair. But the whispers of his friends, the echoes of conscience that refused to be silenced, swirled around him, a maelstrom of memories and hope. They were the lifeline to his past self, the anchor to the humanity that clung on by the barest of threads. As the spiral of doom tightened its coil, Adam knew that the time for indecision had passed. The path to ruin lay before him, but so too did the chance for redemption. With the voices of his friends as his guide, he prepared to confront the darkness within and without, to reclaim the soul that teetered on the edge of oblivion. Chapter 14, The Abyss Stares Back. The Llewellyn mansion, shrouded in an ever-deepening gloom, stood as an ominous sentinel over the once vibrant town of Riverside, now a mere shadow of itself. Within its walls, Adam paced the length of the dust-choked library, the tomes of arcane knowledge that lined the shelves silently judging his every step. The entity's voice, a sibilant hiss that seemed to emanate from the very air, slithered into the room. "Adam, you have wrought much suffering," it whispered, the words a cold caress against his mind. He stopped in his tracks, his jaw set firm. "I know the cost of my actions," he replied, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Mrs. Aldridge stood by the cracked window, her silhouette a pronounced polarity to the pale light that struggled to penetrate the darkness. "Adam, this thing," she said, "it speaks of salvation, but at what cost to your soul?" Adam turned to her, his eyes hollow pits of despair. "My soul is already damned," he said, the bitterness evident in his tone. The entity chuckled, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves. "There is always a price, Adam, but I offer you a chance to undo the chaos you have sown." He clenched his fists, the air around him growing colder. "And the price? A sacrifice," the entity murmured, one of pure intent. Mrs. Aldridge stepped forward, her voice urgent. "Don't listen to it, Adam. It's a trap, as it always has been." Adam's gaze drifted to the window, where the once picturesque view of Riverside was now obscured by a miasma of darkness. "What more do I have to lose?" he asked, more to himself than to her. Mrs. Aldridge's expression softened. "Hope, Adam. You still have hope." He shook his head slowly. "Hope is a luxury for those not standing on the brink of the abyss." The room seemed to pulse with the entity's dark energy, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes. "Decide, Adam," it pressed, its voice a venomous drip. "Reclaim your soul and restore balance, or witness the final descent into ruin." Adam's response was a whisper, barely audible over the mounting wind that howled outside. "I need time to consider." Mrs. Aldridge moved closer, her hand reaching out as if to anchor him to reality. "You have the strength within you, Adam, to resist, to choose a different end to this story." The mansion creaked ominously, as if in response to the battle of wills unfolding within its walls. Adam, standing at the edge of the abyss, felt the gaze of the entity upon him, a pressure that sought to crush the last vestiges of his humanity. As the storm outside raged with renewed vigor, Adam knew that the time for contemplation was over. The choice he faced was one that would define not just his fate, but that of the entire town. The path to ruin had led him here, to this moment, and as the abyss stared back, he realized that the darkest hour was upon them all. Chapter 15, The Last Stand. "You cannot win, Adam," the entity's voice boomed, a hullabaloo that seemed to come from the very walls. "You are but a man, and I am as old as time." Adam's voice, though firm, betrayed the wariness that clung to him like a shroud. "I will not let you have this world," he declared, his words slicing through the omnipresent gloom. Mrs. Aldridge stood steadfast by his side, her face a map of resolve. "Remember why we're here, Adam. For the town, for your friends, for all that is still good." A mirthless laugh echoed around them, the entity's amusement a chilling reminder of its power. Noble sentiments for such a futile gesture. Will you throw your life away so readily? Adam's gaze fixed on the entity's swirling form, a vortex of shadows that coiled and writhed like a living thing. Better to die with purpose than live as a slave to darkness. The entity surged forward, a tidal wave of malice that threatened to engulf them. "So be it," it hissed. The mansion groaned as if in agony, the very foundation quaking as Adam began to chant the words of an ancient incantation, each syllable a defiance of the fate that loomed over them. Mrs. Aldridge joined in, her voice a harmonious counterpart to Adam's. The grimoire opened between them, its pages fluttering in the tumultuous air. The entity recoiled as the incantation built to a crescendo, the air crackling with energy. Adam could feel the power surging through him, a channel between the grimoire and the entity, as he sought to bind it once more. "Your sacrifice is in vain," the entity roared, its form expanding, pressing against the invisible bonds they wove. Adam's determination did not waver, even as the entity's tendrils lashed out, seeking to tear him asunder. "I do this for them, for all who have suffered because of me." The air was alive with the battle of wills, the mansion a crucible within which the fate of Riverside was being forged. Mrs. Aldridge's voice wavered but did not break, her presence a radar of support for Adam as he poured his essence into the ritual. With a final, desperate push, Adam completed the incantation, the words resonating through the core of his being. A brilliant light erupted from the grimoire, enveloping the entity, binding it with chains of radiance that no darkness could penetrate. But the victory was short-lived. With a guttural scream of defiance, the entity shattered the bonds, its power too great for the ritual to contain. The light dimmed, and despair settled like dust in the aftermath. Adam fell to his knees, the last of his strength ebbing away. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper as the entity loomed over him, triumphant. Mrs. Aldridge knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could. No one could ask for more." The entity's laughter filled the room, a sound that foretold the end of all things. "It is done," it declared. "You belong to me." The mansion, a silent witness to the final stand, stood as a monument to Adam's courage and the inexorable path to ruin that had claimed him. As the darkness closed in, the echo of conscience that had once guided him was silenced, leaving only the sigil of malevolent fates to reign supreme. Chapter 16, The Hollow Victory. Adam, his existence now woven into the shadows that blanketed the mansion, understood the irony of his triumph. The victory he had sought was as hollow as the echo of his own fading laughter in the once lively halls. He was a victor in a battle where there were no spoils, only loss. In the mansion's grand library, where the knowledge of ages gathered dust on forgotten shelves, Mrs. Aldridge stood with a tome cradled in her arms, its leather cover worn by the touch of those who had sought its secrets. "Adam," she called into the stillness, her voice a lantern of solace in the engulfing quiet. "It's over, but at what cost?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered. For Adam, now a mere wisp of the man he once was, had become part of the mansion's legacy, a spirit tethered to the very darkness he had fought to contain. The silence that followed was broken only by the creak of floorboards as Mrs. Aldridge moved through the library, her every step a reminder of the life that had once filled the mansion. She placed the tome back onto the shelf, her fingers lingering on the spine, as if to comfort the soul of her lost companion. "You fought bravely," she whispered, her voice soft amidst the grim hush. "You did what you thought was right." The entity, ensnared by the seals that Adam had given his very essence to forge, lay dormant beneath the mansion, a slumbering malevolence that waited for the day it might rise again. Outside, the town of Riverside began to stir from its nightmare, the darkness that had threatened to consume it slowly receding. But the cost had been great, and the scars left behind would mark the town and its people for generations. In the mansion, Adam's presence, though diminished, lingered. He was the guardian of a tomb that held no remains, the keeper of a silence that spoke volumes of the catastrophic failure that had befallen him and his friends. As the mansion settled into its new role as a monument to the fallen, the echo of Adam's conscience, now forever a part of the Llewellyn legacy, served as a solemn reminder of the path to ruin that had been walked and the hollow victory that had been won. Chapter 17, The Legacy of Loss. In this vacuum of life, a moving truck rumbled down the main street, its presence an anomaly in the desolate tableau. The Johnsons, the new family in town, surveyed their surroundings with a mix of trepidation and the heady optimism that accompanies new beginnings. "This place has character, doesn't it?" mused David Johnson, his voice echoing slightly too loudly in the empty space. The lines around his eyes softened as he took in the architecture of the old town square. His wife, Maria, offered a tentative smile, her gaze lingering on the faded signs of storefronts. "It's quiet. But it'll be nice for the kids to have so much space to explore, won't it?" Their two children, Emmy and Max, tumbled out of the car, their youthful energy a stark opposition to the somber mood that hung over Riverside. Emmy's laughter rang out, a sound that hadn't graced the town in far too long. Max, with the boundless curiosity of a 10-year-old, was already peering at the cracks in the sidewalk, imagining the creatures that could be living beneath. "I bet there are tons of cool bugs here," he said, crouching down to get a closer look. "I just hope there are other kids around," Emmy said, scanning the silent houses with a frown. David put an arm around Maria's shoulders as they watched their children adapt to their new environment. "It'll be our fresh start," he said, a note of conviction in his voice. Maria nodded, trying to shake off the unease that clawed at her. "A fresh start," she echoed, her gaze meeting David's. The Llewellyn mansion, hidden from view by the overgrown foliage that had claimed much of the town, loomed in the distance. Inside, the chest that had been the catalyst for so much sorrow sat dormant, its surface dulled by the passage of time, but its malevolence undiminished. The world beyond Riverside remained blissfully unaware of the tragedy and sacrifice that had unfolded within the small town. Life continued, indifferent to the legacy of loss that clung to the once thriving community. As the Johnson family began to settle in, the chest awaited, its sinister presence a dark undercurrent in the stillness of the mansion. The cycle of the sigil of malevolent fates was unbroken, its catastrophic failure a silent sentinel, waiting for the next unwary soul to succumb to its allure. Chapter 18, The Silence That Follows. The world, in its ceaseless march, paid little heed to the stillness that had befallen Riverside. Yet there was a subtle shift, a quietude that whispered of loss and echoed with the silent mourning for souls spirited away into the abyss. Nature itself seemed to bow its head in reverence, the wind carrying the scent of sorrow through the town's empty streets. In the heart of this hushed lamentation stood the Johnsons, the new family whose dreams of a fresh start were woven into the fabric of Riverside's somber reality. David leaned against the frame of their new home's doorway, the wood rough and peeling beneath his touch, while Maria unpacked boxes in the kitchen, her movements methodical, a dance of domesticity amidst the echoes of the past. "Seems like we're the only ones here, doesn't it?" David called out, his voice cutting through the quiet. Maria paused, a chipped plate in hand, and glanced out the window to the abandoned homes that lined their street. "It's eerie, like we missed the rapture or something," she replied, her attempt at humor falling flat in the emptiness. Max, his youthful exuberance undampened by the town's atmosphere, burst into the room, a dusty old book clutched in his dirt-streaked hands. "Look what I found in the attic," he exclaimed, eyes wide with the thrill of discovery. Emmy trailed behind her brother, her own expression less enthused, her gaze drawn to the shadows that seemed to play at the edges of her vision. "There's weird stuff all over this place," she murmured, a frown creasing her brow. David took the book from Max, turning it over to inspect the cover. "The History of Riverside," he read aloud. "Maybe it'll give us some insight into what happened here." Maria set the plate down and wiped her hands on her apron, crossing the room to join her family. "Could be a project for us, learning about the town's past," she suggested, though the unease that had settled in her heart remained. The family gathered around the kitchen table, the book laid open before them. They flipped through the pages, tracing the town's lineage through times of prosperity and hardship. Yet there was a gap, a recent chapter that seemed conspicuously absent from the records. "It's like the town just stopped," David said, his finger resting on the last entry, dated several years prior. Maria nodded, her eyes scanning the text. "There's no mention of what happened, just an abrupt end." In the silence that followed, a chill crept through the room, as if the house itself was reacting to their conversation. The air was heavy with a history untold, secrets that lingered just beyond the reach of the living. Outside, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold. The beauty of the sunset stood in sharp division to the oppressive feeling that hung over Riverside, a reminder that light and darkness were in a perpetual dance. Back at the Llewellyn mansion, the chest remained, its surface marred by the clawing hands of those who had sought to contain its evil. It sat silent and waiting, its malignancy a slumbering serpent that hungered for the day it would be awoken once more. The cycle of the Sigil of Malevolent Fates was poised to begin anew, its mournful reckoning a story yet to be told, its whispers a promise of horrors yet to come. And as night fell upon Riverside, the silence that followed was a somber prelude to the darkness waiting in the wings. The end. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed The Sigil of Malevolent Fates. Please smash that like button, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily storytelling adventures.